A newborn prince is born into the Golden Age of Egypt, around 1380 BCE. His name is Amenhotep, the future Akhenaten. Born to Pharaoh Amenhotep III and Queen Ti, he grows up in the lavish courts of the 18th dynasty. The palaces are filled with ivory furniture, gold-adorned walls, and the smell of lotus incense. As a child, Amenhotep is surrounded by priests, scholars, and the luxuries of imperial life. He is educated in politics, religion, and ritual. Yet even in his youth, he seems distant from the rigid traditions of the priesthood of Amun. In the quiet corners of the palace, under the blazing Egyptian sun, the boy prince begins to wonder. What if there is only one god, not many? Around 1353 BCE, following the death of his father Amenhotep III, the young prince ascends the throne as Pharaoh Amenhotep IV. The kingdom he inherits is one of immense wealth, influence, and religious complexity. Temples to dozens of gods dot the Nile Valley, the most powerful of which is the cult of Amun. Its priesthood rivals the authority of the pharaoh himself. Amenhotep IV begins his reign in traditional fashion. He performs the expected rituals, honors the gods, and takes his place as Egypt's divine ruler. Yet from the outset, there are signs that he is not an ordinary king. He shows little interest in the dominant cults, especially Amun, and instead favors a lesser-known solar deity, Aten, the visible sun disk. His early art and inscriptions begin to reflect this subtle shift in devotion, though the full extent of his religious intentions remains hidden. Despite the pressure to conform, Amenhotep IV begins to chart his own path. In his early years on the throne, he is already making changes to court ceremonies and temple construction, gradually elevating Aten above the other gods. The traditional elite, particularly the powerful priests of Amun, grow wary, but the young pharaoh holds the supreme title and divine status. For now, his reforms are modest, but beneath the surface, a revolution is quietly brewing, one that will soon challenge the foundations of Egyptian religion, art, and politics. By the 5th year of his reign, around 1351 BCE, Amenhotep IV initiates one of the most dramatic religious revolutions in ancient history. No longer content with subtle preference, he openly challenges the entire polytheistic foundation of Egyptian society. The many gods worshipped for centuries, Amun, Osiris, Thoth, Isis, are pushed aside, their temples neglected or closed. In their place, a single god is elevated above all others, Aten, the sun disk, giver of life and light. This transformation is not merely spiritual, it is deeply political. The powerful priesthood of Amun, whose wealth and influence had rivaled, the crown is stripped of authority. By undermining them, the pharaoh consolidates power directly under himself as Aten's chosen intermediary on earth. To reflect this radical shift, the king changes his own identity. He renames himself Akhenaten, meaning effective for Aten. This is more than a name. It's a declaration of allegiance, a signal that his reign is no longer a continuation of the past but the beginning of a new divine order. Akhenaten commissions the destruction of Amun's name from inscriptions and monuments across Egypt, replacing it with praise for Aten Duat. Art and language evolve to reflect this singular devotion. Traditional symbols are replaced with sun rays ending, in hands gently offering life to the pharaoh and his family. The gods no longer walk among mortals, only Aten, distant and abstract, shines from above. The world is being reshaped, not by war or conquest, but by an idea, that one God alone rules all, and that Akhenaten is his earthly voice. In a bold and unprecedented move, Akhenaten orders the construction of a brand new capital city dedicated solely to the worship of Aten. He chooses a remote and untouched stretch of land along the Nile, far from the religious strongholds of Thebes and Memphis. There, between two cliffs, he envisions a sacred space that will serve as the earthly home of the sun disk. He names it Akhenaten, meaning horizon of Aten. Unlike other Egyptian cities, Akhenaten is not built atop ancient foundations or beside temples to older gods. It rises from the desert as a symbol of spiritual rebirth, a blank slate upon which Akhenaten can inscribe his vision. The city is constructed with astonishing speed. Palaces, administrative buildings, and temples appear within just a few years. At the heart of the city stands the great temple of Aten, open to the sky so that the sun's rays can shine directly upon the altars. The city is laid out according to a sacred design. Wide avenues connect the major complexes, and the royal family's residence is centrally positioned to reflect their closeness to the divine. Artists and architects abandon the rigid conventions of the past. Walls and tombs are adorned with scenes of the royal family in everyday life. Akhenaten and Nefertiti playing with their daughters, worshipping Aten, or sharing meals. This new style is intimate, naturalistic, and human, a stark contrast to the formal grandeur of earlier dynasties. Akhenaten is not just a capital, it is a manifesto in stone. It embodies Akhenaten's radical vision, a world governed not by a pantheon of gods and powerful priesthoods, but by a single divine force shining from above, and by the Pharaoh who walks beneath it. The city stands as both a spiritual center and a political statement, a declaration that Egypt has entered a new era. During his reign from approximately 1351 to 1336 BCE, Akhenaten introduced sweeping changes that extended far beyond religion. His rule became a cultural revolution, reshaping Egyptian society, art, architecture, and even language in accordance with his singular devotion to Aten. At the heart of Akhenaten's rule was the idea that the sun disk, Aten, was the sole divine power in the universe. Unlike the traditional Egyptian gods who had human or animal forms and complex mythologies, Aten was abstract and formless, represented only as a radiant disk whose rays extended down like fingers, each ending in a hand that offered the Ankh, symbol of life, to the royal family. Worship of any other deity was forbidden. Temples dedicated to Amun, Ptah, and others were shut down, desecrated, or left to fall into ruin. Akhenaten positioned himself not just as a king, but as the sole mediator between Aten and humanity. Only he, and to some extent his queen Nefertiti, could properly worship Aten, meaning all religious activity had to revolve around the royal family. These theological shifts sparked major cultural transformations. Art in the Amarna period, named after the new capital city, broke with centuries of rigid, idealized depictions of pharaohs and gods. Instead, it embraced realism and even vulnerability. Akhenaten himself was shown with elongated features, a protruding belly, narrow limbs, and an androgynous form, possibly to symbolize his divine connection to both creation and fertility, or perhaps reflecting a more personal, mystical image of the king. Scenes of daily life appeared in tombs and temples, the royal couple holding hands, playing with their children, or worshipping beneath Aten's rays. These images humanized the royal family in a way never before seen in Egyptian history. Architecture changed as well. Temples to Aten were built without roofs to allow direct sunlight inside, reflecting the belief that Aten's light was sacred and should not be blocked. Buildings were constructed rapidly using smaller blocks called talatat, which allowed for faster assembly and featured vividly carved reliefs and inscriptions praising Aten and the royal family. Language, too, was influenced. Hymns and poetry dedicated to Aten replaced traditional religious texts. The most famous of these, the Great Hymn to the Aten, is attributed to Akhenaten himself and describes Aten as the source of all life, transcending boundaries of land, people, and even traditional religious form. However, these sweeping changes came at a cost. The pharaoh's religious obsession left many traditional institutions neglected. The powerful priesthood of Amun was cast aside, alienating the old religious elite. Egypt's military and diplomatic networks weakened, as Akhenaten paid little attention to foreign affairs. Vassal states in Canaan and Syria complained of being left unprotected, and the Egyptian empire's influence abroad began to wane. Within Egypt, the reforms created deep divisions. Many Egyptians who had worshipped their local gods for generations resisted the new religion in silence or private. Though Akhenaten's court flourished artistically, the broader society remained uneasy. Despite his sweeping vision, the new order was fragile, built more on the will of one man than on the enduring beliefs of a people. As Akhenaten's reign progressed, it became increasingly isolated, brilliant in its expression but disconnected from the traditions and needs of the wider kingdom. Around 1336 BCE, Akhenaten died after ruling for roughly 17 years. His death marked the beginning of the rapid collapse of the religious and cultural revolution he had so passionately pursued. The exact circumstances of his death remain unknown. There are no detailed records or grand monuments marking his passing. He may have died in Akhenaten, the city he built in honor of Aten, but even this is uncertain. His burial site, likely constructed in the royal wadi near the city, was left unfinished and later abandoned. After his death, confusion and instability gripped Egypt. Akhenaten had devoted so much energy to spiritual matters that he had neglected the military, diplomatic alliances, and internal unity. Foreign territories once under Egyptian control had rebelled or been lost, and at home, resentment toward his suppression of the old gods simmered. His successor, possibly Smenkhkare, or even his own son Tutankhaten, ruled briefly before the religious order he had created was undone. The backlash was swift and deliberate. The worship of Aten was abandoned, and the old pantheon, especially the cult of Amun, was restored to power. The capital was moved back to Thebes, and the temples Akhenaten had closed were reopened. Even his name was erased from monuments, inscriptions, and official king lists. His city, Akhenaten, was abandoned and left to decay in the desert. Later rulers, especially those of the Ramesside period, labeled him a heretic and a madman, someone who had brought chaos and dishonor to Egypt. Yet, despite these efforts to erase him, Akhenaten's legacy endured in quieter, more subtle ways. His experiment with monotheism was unlike anything else in the ancient world. It prefigured, in some scholars' eyes, later developments in religious history, particularly the rise of monotheistic faiths such as Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. The artistic changes of the Amarna period, with their emotional realism and human intimacy, left a permanent mark on Egyptian art. Though vilified in his own time and forgotten for centuries, Akhenaten has become one of the most studied and debated figures in Egyptian history. His life stands as a bold, solitary challenge to tradition, a vision of a new world that burned brightly for a moment before fading into the sands of history. For centuries, Akhenaten was a forgotten figure, buried beneath layers of sand and official erasure. Ancient Egyptian records had deliberately omitted his name, labeling his reign as a heretical interlude. His capital city, Akhenaten, vanished from maps and memory. It wasn't until the 18th and 19th centuries, during the rise of modern archaeology, that traces of his extraordinary life and revolution began to re-emerge. In the late 1800s, European archaeologists exploring the site of Tel El Amarna, modern name for Akhenaten, uncovered ruins unlike anything else in Egypt. The architecture was lighter, more open, and the artwork portrayed scenes of domestic life and a sun-disk deity with rays ending in hands. These discoveries puzzled researchers. As excavation continued, they unearthed inscriptions bearing the name Akhenaten, a pharaoh previously unknown in Egyptian records. it became clear that this ruler had tried to reshape Egypt's religion, art, and politics in radical ways. A major breakthrough came with the discovery of the Amarna letters, hundreds of clay tablets written in Akkadian, the diplomatic language of the time. These texts, found in the ruins of Akhenaten, revealed correspondence between Akhenaten's court and foreign rulers, shedding light on the political instability and neglect of Egypt's empire during his reign. In the 20th century, interest in Akhenaten exploded. Scholars, theologians, and even psychoanalysts became fascinated by his experiment with monotheism. Sigmund Freud controversially speculated that Akhenaten's religion may have influenced the origins of Judaism. Others saw him as a visionary, a spiritual pioneer centuries ahead of his time. His wife, Nefertiti, and his son, Tutankhamun, also captured the public imagination, adding further mystique to the Amarna period. Today, Akhenaten is recognized as one of the most enigmatic and revolutionary figures in world history. Though his vision was buried and denounced in his own era, modern rediscovery has restored his place in the narrative of ancient Egypt, not as a forgotten heretic, but as a bold reformer who dared to reshape the divine order.